Alright, actually let's start with this one. So the cerebral cortex is just the outside layer of the brain. It's gray matter. So the cerebral hemispheres and lobes. We'll go to the full brain. So these are the cerebral hemispheres, and the cerebrum is the largest and most highly developed part of the brain. All conscious thought and intellectual functions originate in the cerebral hemispheres. Each cerebral hemisphere, left and right, contains lobes and regions: frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital, and insula. So, going through those, the frontal lobe includes the prefrontal gyrus and goes to the front. And it is responsible for voluntary control of muscles.
Which I thought was kind of funny.
And somatic motor association areas. Performs abstract intellectual functions, but choose whichever one works best for you. I think control of voluntary muscles is an easy one. Parietal lobe includes the post-central gyrus and goes back to about this point. Let's see, I think I can see it better on this one.
That's the thing I found.
Yeah, so you can see this separates the parietal and the temporal, and the parietal and the occipital. So the parietal lobe receives general somatic sensory information, receptors for touch, pressure, pain, vibration, conscious perception of the senses. The temporal lobe, that's an easy one. It receives auditory input, just this region here. Then we have the occipital, which is all the way in the back here, which is responsible for vision, receives visual input. The insula, you reach in here and pull this back, and it's in there, and that is responsible for taste. Okay, next page, or actually, they fell in there. Oh well, I'll just wash my hands. So the longitudinal fissure is this long part here. Essentially, it just separates the two cerebral hemispheres. The transverse fissure separates the cerebellum and the occipital, the cerebrum from the cerebellum. That's what it is. Okay.
I know. I was like, it is perfect.
So the dural folds are all of this inner layer of the dura mater that extends into the fissures. Dural sinuses are large collecting veins located within the dural folds. The falx cerebri is a dural fold that dips into the longitudinal fissure and attaches anteriorly to the crystal galli, contains superior and inferior sagittal sinuses. Then the tentorium cerebelli is a dural fold that dips into the transverse fissure down here. So that's the tentorium cerebelli. The falx cerebelli is a dural fold that dips between the cerebellar hemispheres. I'm a little confused about that one, and never mind, it's on here. So there's the falx cerebri and the falx cerebelli. The falx cerebri goes into the longitudinal fissures. The falx cerebelli also dips into between the cerebellar hemispheres. So I'm a little confused, but we'll carry on. The central sulcus is a deep groove that separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. So it's essentially the one that you can follow along down all the way. That's the central sulcus between the two post-central and pre-central gyrus or whatever. So now we're on to those. So the prefrontal gyrus contains primary motor cortex responsible for voluntary movement of skeletal muscles. So it's right here. It's just like in front of the gyrus. Post-central, that is your primary sensory cortex, responsible for pressure, temperature, pain, vibration. cerebellum. So the cerebellum is this little guy, of course, and helps maintain balance and equilibrium.
And he was 9'7".
The corpora quadrumina.
You should have seen
All
his
right.
head. You can
So
tell
now we're
exactly
getting
how
into
far
it.
Yeah.
So the corpus quadrumina has the.
Because part of why he was so overdue.
I might need another glove.
I would just, so finally I got induced and
Okay.
everything. So anyway, I had a C-section with him, and then on my second,
Okay,
she's like,
so
induced early, it would be
you can
small,
see
I
back
can't
there.
do it, blah, blah, blah. So I tried, and I was like, I just don't want to do it all again because I pushed for 2.5
So here's the
hours with my
pineal
first one. I'm like,
gland.
I don't want to push, I don't want to.
And
Then
below
end
it
up with a C-section,
is
plus I'm gonna be
the
induced, which was hell itself.
corpus quadrumina, which has your superior caliculi and inferior caliculi, responsible for auditory and visual reflex.
Yeah,
So,
it is, and so that's why I'm like, I just don't want to do it all again. She's like, I think
then we
you'll
saw
be
the
fine.
pineal
So
gland, which is responsible
I
for
tried,
secreting
and
melatonin.
I pushed
The
for a long
olfactory
time.
tract.
My my epidural had worn off, and she
So,
wasn't in. So she came in. They called her and like she was ready.
the
to
olfactory
deliver. So
bulb
she came in at like 6:30 in the morning, and
is right in here.
he was just
This
stuck
little
in
guy,
there,
that's
I
the bulb.
And I can remember because she was there.
Responsible
and they
for,
did an episiotomy. So I got her all plugged in.
synapses from cranial nerve 1
And she like stood up. I remember
And then
her
the
chair,
olfactory
like,
tract
leaned back and bammed against the wall. She goes,
is
"Let's go."
contains axons
And people
that
just
connect
started
the olfactory bulbs with
scrambling,
the
and she- and
cerebral
someone's like,
hemispheres.
"Wait, the cord's in
The
the wall." She goes,
optic
"Check it out."
chiasma
Sprint
is
taking down
this
the
thing
hall.
right
She's
here,
like- And she's like 7 minutes. from
which
when you hit
is
her
fibers
side,
from the
the
medial
time
half
to
of each
delivery.
retina
She's like, "You're
crossover
still my
to
fastest
opposite
delivery
sides.
ever."
So then we have the optic nerves come off of the optic chiasma, and then below we have the optic tracts down here. So it's like a big X. So these are the optic tracts that go up to the optic nerves.
It was awful. Oh, God. But they had put an IV line in because I had a C-section.
You can't see the
And last thing I
pituitary
remember,
gland on
they
here,
were
but
scrubbing
that's
it. She goes, "We're
what
not
links
scrubbing,
the
this is dash and slash."
nervous
And I was like,
system
the last
to
thing
the
I heard.
endocrine
Yeah,
system,
yeah, I'm
produces
like,
hormones.
And then when I woke
The
up, I was
infundibulum
like,
is
"Oh my
actually
gosh, she's
right
alive."
here. It's
She's
just
like,
under
"Yeah,
the
he's actually, like,
chiasma.
miraculously doing
And you can't see it
great."
on that brain.
His outburst
The
was really bad.
pituitary gland we
His
can't
first
see.
one
This is
was
the
really bad
infundibulum,
oxygen.
so this part.
And then they did it like a minute later, and I get all sad if I
From
tell
what we
you the
learned
whole
last
story,
time.
but
I'm almost positive that's correct,
scores
but
went way up, and so she's like,
we'll see.
"He sees
Mammillary
it." She
bodies
goes, "You
are,
know,
of
you
course,
may
these
see,
little
like,
bulbs
as
at
he
the bottom.
starts in school, he may have
Control
some
eating,
issues,
chewing,
like,
licking,
little
swallowing
scars, like, we just don't know.
reflexes.
He was
Okay,
so
here's the
gifted.
pons,
He was like,
which
"It's okay, he was
is
valedictorian."
responsible for respiratory system
And I was
control.
like, I don't know. Lots of
Then
good people
it links
back
the
then.
cerebellum with the
So then
midbrain,
like,
diencephalon,
like,
cerebellum,
"Can I just
spinal
have
cord.
a sketch?"
The cerebral punctacles
And she goes, "Yeah, I was gonna say, if you didn't want one, that
are
would be
just
either
these
your
little
doctor or
bulbs that
I
come
She
down.
was my only one I was actually
Those are the
looking for,
punctacles.
so, but,
Medulla oblongata is all these pyramids of desiccation. It's just this region here.
I know, that's what I-
Responsible
one of my
for
friends texted her.
respiratory,
She ended
digestive,
up having a
or
C-section with the
yeah,
last one, but
cardiovascular
they were- that one was
control center.
Yeah.
Pyramids of
So she's- it
desiccation
was scheduled.
are
But
just
that's
the
what I said.
areas
It was my first two.
that cross
I would've
over
died, and they would've died.
motor
I would
neurons.
have.
And where are those? So those are right here. They are just those,
I get it.
like the little ridges.
No,
Yeah.
I give you but my midwife just got
Corpus callosum is the band of commissural fissures which links cerebral hemispheres. So now we have to go to the half brain.
Yeah, and you don't have time.
No, I think that we have nurses that
So the corpus callosum is this giant
My
thing
friend
up
was the
top.
first one and had it in a bathtub at home.
It just links the
Or
cerebral
a pool
hemispheres.
or
The
something.
fornix
They, like, videoed the whole thing. I was like,
is
wow, I would never
the
do
tract
that.
of white matter.
It's
It
not
forms the
for it,
floor
watch
of the
it.
lateral ventricle here.
But I was like, I come from a whole different
Then we have,
experience.
of course, the lateral ventricle itself that's filled with cerebral spinal fluid
the next 20 years ago.
and covered by the septum pellucidum.
Unless they have
The interventricular foramina is right here, this hole. Interventricular foramina, small opening connecting the lateral ventricles with the third ventricle. And the third ventricle receives cerebral spinal fluid from the lateral ventricles, and then it exits through the cerebral aqueduct. For some reason, I'm having trouble. There we go. I think that looks like it. So the cerebral aqueduct then goes to.
Maybe she'll be nicer to you if she.
She's never been mean to me.
Okay, never mind. That's not gonna be the next thing. The next one is the choroid plexus. So this one I can't really.
I can imagine she's
You'll see all this stuff on the bottom. That's
I can
like
totally see that. You too.
nerves and stuff. That's the choroid
Have a good
plexus.
one.
It's a network of capillaries and epididymal cells located within each ventricle, and the epididymal cells produce cerebrospinal fluid.
So it's just that like chunk of tissue. Right
Yeah,
there? Okay.
yeah. In some brains, it's easier to see it. Then we have the thalamus, which makes up the walls of the third ventricle, relays sensory information to the primary sensory cortex, and I feel like we can't really see the hypothalamus.
I predict you guys are gonna ace this.
I hope so. I hope so. Spelling gets me, so I will go home and practice that. So the hypothalamus, I'm not really seeing that on this brain. It comes down here, right?
Well, it's right in front of your thalamus. So, do you mind if I pull
Yeah,
it this way just a little bit?
Does it dip down in there, or is
Yeah,
this
this is not the best brain.
Right.
It's this right here.
Okay, gotcha.
Because this would be your thalamus, and then this would be hypothalamus. But
Yeah.
here's your
I feel like
optic.
the last brain that I had, I was like, there it is.
Yeah, this one
kinda
is not very good.
like, okay.
Because I can't even see. This very front part of this is your optic nerve, so it's right here,
Cool.
behind the optic nerve.
Awesome. So that's the hypothalamus. Then that's responsible for connecting nervous system with the endocrine system.
Because it attaches to the pituitary gland.
Gotcha. Temperature regulation, all that good stuff. Regulatory hormones, ADH and OXT.
Did you need me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we saw the cerebral aqueduct here, and it goes to the fourth ventricle down here.
I'm going.
So the fourth ventricle receives cerebral spinal fluid through the cerebral aqueduct.
Yeah, I
and
guess. Send them to me.
It's located between the pons and the cerebellum.
Okay,
So the flow of cerebral spinal fluid, lateral ventricles to the interverticular foramina, to the third ventricle, to the cerebral aqueduct, to the fourth ventricle. And then from there it goes into median aperture to lateral apertures to the subarachnoid space and back into the venous blood supply. The dura mater, of course, is this big outer part. Then it's the arachnoid matter, then the pia mater. Arbor vitae is the branching white matter in the cerebellum, which connect the cerebellar cortex with the cerebral peduncles. That is a little confusing.
It looks like the veins to the leaves right there. That's your arbor vitae.
So that whole thing that we're looking at, it's just that.
That's the
area?
cerebrum. And then your peduncles are what come up here, go up this way.
Okay.
And like right in there. But the actual white veining.
Gotcha. All that kind of pretty
Yep.
tree-like
It
thing.
looks like a tree.
Okay,
does,
so it
yep.
is that section. Okay.
Which arbor means tree of life.
Oh. Okay.
Nice.
There
I
we go.
took Latin for 2 years and don't remember anything except for
That'd be a good one to
Vita.
take. Latin. I feel like, yeah, taking anatomy was a crash course in some Latin.
Yeah. It is.
Cool. There we
Is that
go.
all?
That is it.
Nice.